Hey everyone, welcome back to Mission DIY. A friend of mine wanted a floating shelf for his bar that could hold a lot of liquor bottles. He even sent me this AI-generated picture as inspiration. The challenge was it had to be roughly 80 inches wide by 12 inches deep, look like it was floating, and also had to be strong enough that neither of us would be worrying about hundreds of dollars worth of bottles crashing to the floor. I think it turned out great, but after building it, there are definitely a few things I'd do differently next time. For the internal frame, I used 1x2 lumber. I cut the front and back pieces to about 80 inches long, then attached cross pieces every 6 inches or so. I temporarily connected the front and the back pieces at the end to keep everything lined up, but ended up taking it apart so there would be two separate framing pieces. The back frame would be mounted directly to the wall, while the front frame would become the skeleton for the shelf itself. I then went back and attached another screw to each cross piece so that the cross pieces wouldn't spin. For the outside skin, I used 1/4-inch plywood. My goal was to keep the shelf as light as possible while still making it rigid once everything was assembled together. I ripped down more 1/4-inch plywood to use as the skin for the front and the sides. Once everything was assembled, I filled the holes, sanded everything smooth, and it was finally starting to look like the original AI concept. To finish it off, I applied a dark stain, followed by a water-based acrylic top coat for durability. Then it was finally time to install it and see how it looked in its new home. Now here's where the project got a little more challenging. Normally, I'd want to mount something like this directly into wood studs. Unfortunately, this wall had aluminum studs, so that wasn't an option. Instead, I used heavy-duty drywall anchors rated for about 60 pounds each, and installed several of them across the length of the shelf to spread out the load. You'll also notice here I had drilled the holes for the wall anchors too high at first, so after lowering them, I had to go back and fill the original holes and eventually repaint the area. That was a super frustrating mistake, and it reminds me to measure twice, think about it 3 more times, and ultimately drill once. I then slid the shelf over the frame and secured it to the internal frame with screws. Even though the shelf itself wasn't very heavy, I knew that eventually it would be. So now let's get to what I would do differently next time. For me, lesson 1 is changing the internal frame. The 1x2s worked, but next time I'd probably use 2x2s or something a little beefier. The finished shelf was surprisingly rigid, but during installation, the frame had just enough flex that it made me a little nervous. Lesson 2 is I'd probably use 1/2-inch plywood instead of 1/4-inch. It would make the shelf feel even more solid and reduce some of the flex. So for lesson 3, the biggest surprise came at the very end. We decided to add decorative support brackets underneath the shelf. Honestly, I was so disappointed. I had spent a lot of time trying to make this shelf look like it was completely floating, so adding brackets felt like I was giving up on that original vision, and it felt like a big failure. But after talking it through, my friend couldn't have cared less about whether people noticed the brackets. His biggest concern was knowing the shelf would be rock solid, especially when it was fully loaded with bottles and during busy times. And honestly, he was so right. Sometimes the best solution isn't the one that looks the coolest, but it's the one that gives you confidence it's going to do its job for years to come. This whole experience really made me think. Extending grace is often more important than expecting perfection. My friend gave me grace when the project didn't turn out exactly as we had planned or how he had wanted. And I'm thankful that God does the same for us. None of us is perfect, and that's exactly why we need Jesus. Proverbs 16:9 says, "We can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps." The plan was a perfectly floating shelf, but the better outcome was a shelf that gave my friend complete confidence every time he put another bottle on it. I'm happy with how this project turned out, and I'm grateful my friend trusted me to build it and for his flexibility. If you're thinking about building your own floating shelf, hopefully this gives you a few ideas and maybe helps you avoid a couple of the mistakes I made. The new floating shelf now holds all of the extra bottles, keeping them within easy reach during busy times behind the bar. They used to take up this entire shelf, so moving them freed up a ton of storage space for glassware and other bar supplies. There's even enough room to move these bottles up here too. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more DIY projects, and I'll see you in the next Mission DIY. Thanks for watching.